This is a video that I've been putting off making for a while. This has been requested by a number of people. This is a Dark Souls 1 spells tier list for both PvP and PvE. PvP on the left and PvE on the right. There are more spells than rings, but I'm going to do this in a similar way to the rings tier list because it's simpler that way. And of course, I'm gonna, talk about each of the spells as we go along. So first up is Tranquil Walk of Peace. Generally useful in PvE, pretty much useless in PvE. Makes people walk slow in an area around you for a period of time. Also, they can't dodge roll while they're within the radius. Very strong, super annoying. Generally considered to be in bad taste in duels, but occasionally utilized. Fire Whip, I guess I'll say, is generally useless in PvP and pretty useful in PvE. It actually does a lot of damage, but in PvP you'll almost always get hit if you try to use Fire Whip. In PvE it's a high damaging spell, but it's still rather slow. I guess I'll put it in situationally useful. Great Magic Weapon is generally useless in PvP. There are better options. That being said, with only 15 int, it's one of the better spell buffs. So there's that. And then in PvE, Great Magic Weapon is very good. Almost any build can utilize it. Only 15 intelligence and 1 attunement slot is a very low requirement for a fairly significant damage increase. Dark Orb is generally useless in PvP and generally useless in PvE. It has a really slow cast time. It doesn't do very much damage. Staggers pretty heavily, but even still, there are just better options. You know what? Yeah, Magic Barrier. Okay, Magic Barrier. Oh boy. So in PvP, Magic Barrier is pretty much just inferior to Great Magic Barrier. Great Magic Barrier is just a better spell, but with the lower requirements, you might sometimes want to use Magic Barrier. And then in PvE, like, I guess you could use it against Seath, but for the most part, it's generally useless. Pretty much there's like 2 bosses where magic damage is even a consideration, those being the 4 Kings and Seath. And outside of those situations, it really doesn't have much of a use. Power Within fits onto some builds in PvP, but usually not the best option. The damage trade-off, or the damage increase and stamina regeneration is nice, but it kills you. So a little bit of a drawback with that. And then of course it's generally useful in PvE. Most builds would like to have Power Within. Almost every build, you can get Power Within very early on into the game, and you can use it against pretty much every single boss. So yeah, Oral Decoy is completely useless in PvP. People don't tend to turn around and start attacking the Oral Decoy. And then PvE, it's kind of useless. I believe you have to not already be aggroed by an enemy for them to fall for the Oral Decoy. So if you wanted to do like a stealth playthrough, you could definitely do that. Similarly with Hush, masks the sounds of your footsteps and dodges, similarly to the Slumbering Dragon Crest Ring. But in PvP, being a phantom already mutes a lot of your sounds, so not much of a use there, and then also generally useless in PvE for similar reasons, although it's kind of more useful than Oral Decoy because you can run straight up to things from behind them and they won't hear you. So that's kind of nice. Crystal Magic Weapon's pretty strong. Crystal Magic Weapon's pretty strong. Toxic Mist. Toxic Mist takes too long to apply the toxin, and the toxin applied by Toxic Mist is not that much stronger than poison. In PvE, when you get toxic, you take a lot of damage, but in PvP there are multiple sources of toxic, and they do varying amounts of damage, and Toxic Mist, if I remember correctly, only does slightly more damage than the base poison. I'm gonna say repair is completely useless in PvP because while there is a single situation in which it could technically be useful if your weapons aren't repaired before you get into a fight, if you actually like if you actually get into a fight and you notice that your weapon breaks and then you use the repair spell in a fight to repair your weapon, like somebody ought to give you a freaking medal, honestly. Like that's crazy. Uh, PvE, it's situationally useful. The nice thing about it is that you can rest at a bonfire and attune it, and then cast it, and then attune whatever your other spell was again. So it's sort of zero cost if you already have it, assuming you have the stats to use it. But it's not a spell that you keep on your hotbar or in your attunement slots because the situation where it arises, where the need for it arises, is like not that common. Yeah. Homing Crystal Soulmass has a lot of uses in PvP, desyncing things, just generally warding off approaches, and the fact that you can face away from an opponent and they won't fire and then choose when to shoot them by turning back around is rather useful. But for the most part, it's still not very strong. This isn't like an S tier, but it's you're not trolling by having it attuned. And then I guess it's generally useful in PvE as well. It's just more damage on your burst damage combo. Wog is pretty useful in PvP. It used to hit people a lot more than it does nowadays, but it's still fairly strong, and it's something you have to be aware of whenever someone has an offhand talisman. That's usually the reason that talisman is there. And then it's decent in PvE. Honestly, I'm going to put it in situationally useful in PvE because it's more useful for like groups of enemies rather than like I guess having it attuned all the time. I guess it's technically generally useful, but you don't really want to use it against bosses or in most situations where a lot of damage is required. Poison Mist is in the same category as Toxic Mist, it's just not that useful. Resist Curse is completely useless in PvP, or at least it's supposed to be. And it's generally useless in PvE because there are other ways to cure Curse, and it's kind of a waste of an attunement slot. Chaos Storm is situationally useful in PvP, I guess, kinda, and situationally useful in PvE. 2 attunement slots is kind of a lot. Fire Tempest does more damage, but it is certainly an option. Black Flame is one of the best spells in the entire game in PvP, and it's like kind of... I'm going to put it in generally useless in PvE because Great Combustion is better in PvE because it is not split damage. Acid Surge is generally useless in PvP. The spear that was paired alongside the equivalent of Acid Surge to break people's armor in Demon Souls was removed, so you can't just break people's equipment all the time. Or you can try anyways, but Acid Surge is just not as effective, and of course it's like pretty much completely useless in PvE. Cast Light is useless in PvP, although it looks kind of cool. If your character happens to have an attunement slot and the base stats required to cast it, you might cast it at the beginning of a fight just so you have a little thingy-majig. And then in PvE, it's like situationally useful in the Tomb of the Giants and also for the walls that only disappear when you have a light source in Ulasil. So, yeah, I guess that's decent. Heal is generally useless, and then situationally useful in PvE. Some people do PvP with heal spells. If you were doing PvP with heal spells, you would rarely, if ever, use the base heal spell. So, there's that. Emit Force is not that good. It's like Wrath, but worse. I mean, I guess it's situationally useful. You could like knock someone off a bridge with it. A lot of the people who have opinions or are curious about opinions on Dark Souls PvP are talking specifically about fight clubs or organized duels. I prefer to still include the sort of random invasion aspect of Dark Souls, even though that aspect of it is no longer really active. So in that regards, Emit Force kind of has a use, but in most of the fight clubs and other such situations, there isn't a realistic way for you to fall off the edge of a cliff. And then, of course, it's generally useless in PvE because everything that Emit Force does, Wrath and Force each individually do better. Great Magic Barrier is pretty good. In this, it's situationally useful, but in the situation where it's useful, it's extremely useful. Running a Moonlight Greatsword build or a magic using build of pretty much any kind against someone with Great Magic Barrier pretty much means you just have to wait or switch to another weapon. So yeah, quite useful. Very, very large damage reduction. And then I guess it's situationally useful in PvE as well, but that situation is, as discussed, less common. And yeah, Lightning Spear's too slow. It rarely ever hits anything, but when it does kind of a lot of damage. So in PvE, it's generally useful. Dark Fog is like Toxic Mist, Poison Mist, and Acid Surge, but a magical variant. I put that in completely useless, but that's generally useless. And then, of course, it's generally useless in PvE as well. It's just another one of the mist spells, but in a different school of magic, and I think with a slightly stronger poison. The poison of Dark Fog, I think, might even be stronger than Poison Mist, but still, the cast time is too slow. And yeah. Bountiful Sunlight is pretty strong. I think you only get one cast of it, so that kind of sucks. But for regen builds, it's certainly an option. It's just not a very popular build, though. I'm gonna. I want to put this in completely useless, but I'll put it in generally useless. Heavy Soul Arrow is pretty bad in PvP because it's just so slow. I mean, obviously, I guess, right? And then in PvE, Heavy Soul Arrow makes sorcerer runs. Sorcerer runs in PvE are really, really heavily based on how much knowledge you have, because once you get to Firelink Shrine, you can go down the stairs and talk to Rickert and get Heavy Soul Arrow, and Heavy Soul Arrow just absolutely demolishes early bosses, even with base stats. It's really, really strong. Replenishment is pretty good. It's a buff that you'd kind of like to have. Most builds don't run regen. Some builds do run regen. Every build would like to run regen. Most builds don't, because you can't eat a green blossom and have replenishment active at the same time. Magic Weapon is weaker than Great Magic Weapon, and Magic Weapon is Magic Weapon is weaker than Great Magic Weapon in both PvP and PvE, although it has more casts, but 3 casts is more than enough. Great Heal Excerpt is situationally useful. You know what? No, generally useless. It just doesn't have enough casts. Great Heal is like pretty much just Great Heal Excerpt, but better. I think it has a lower stat requirement and fewer casts, but of course that's, you'd have to have a lot of health for that to really make a huge difference. And then Remedy cures poison and toxic and maybe bleed or possibly just poison. But in PvP, it's too slow, and you can just use Moss. In PvE, it's too slow, and you can just use Moss. But if you don't have any Moss, then, or if you need to do that a lot for some reason, then Remedy will save you some resources in the long run. Fire Tempest is situationally useful in both PvP and PvE. You could argue that it's generally useful in PvE, but like probably not. Probably not. Magic Shield is like kind of bad. It's not that bad though. it's generally useless. Most people don't use it. There's a reason most people don't use it. And then generally useless in PvE as well. It's just not super strong. It makes pretty much any shield fantastic, but only for a brief period of time. And in order to use Magic Shield, you need to have it attuned and have your catalyst in the right hand slot to effectively utilize your left hand slot shield, which means you can't use a primary weapon without switching, and it's just a weird combination of factors. Pretty much all the soul arrow spells are generally useless in PvP and pretty good in PvE. Soul arrow is fantastic, super strong. Karmic justice is pretty bad, pretty bad. If it were fewer attacks, I think it's like 5. It's like 3 or 5 attacks that you have to get hit by for karmic justice to trigger, and the damage calculation is done based off of the spell power augmentation of your right hand slot, your active right hand slot at the time that it triggers and not the time that it is cast. So the damage calculation's really weird. Sometimes you can make it do like more damage than it's supposed to, but it's pretty difficult to get people to even swing at you that many times in a row, let alone actually hit you that many times in a row. So yeah. And then it's pretty much useless in PvE for similar reasons, except for the fact that you can get enemies in PvE to hit you many times very easily, but why would you even want that? Darkbead in PvP is pretty good. Decent players will rarely, if ever, get hit by it. At least the in your face shotgun thing, but you can also fan it from a distance and do some chip damage. So yeah, it's decent. And then I guess situationally useful in PvE because it does a lot of damage, but so do a lot of the other spells. Homeward is useless in PvP. Homeward is situationally useful in PvE, like if you're farming or whatever, and you don't want to spend a bunch of homeward bones, but most people don't use it. I'm gonna add a tier below this. And we'll just call this the we'll just call it the strats or something. I don't know. It needs a different color too. There. All right, and this is the strats tier. Chameleon goes in there. There are strats. You can use Chameleon for stuff. It's not very useful. If you're invading or being invaded, you can kind of hide pretty well, but you're a little goofball, you silly guy. You silly, silly guy. Shamalelion. I don't think it's actually completely useless in PvE, but it kind of is. I'm just going to put it in generally useless. Yeah, same. Same. Great Lightning Spear, PvE, yeah, does a lot of damage. Chaos Fire Whip, no, not very good. PvE, I mean, I guess. It's also pretty slow, though. Okay, and then these ones are pretty easy to rank because these are technically speaking, I think these are the best weapon buffs in the game. Dark Moon Blade does more damage than Crystal Magic Weapon at the damage threshold or the damage cap. And then Sunlight Blade is the only weapon buff that isn't magic damage and is also a spell. So its competition is like Gold Pine Resin, and while Gold Pine Resin is the strongest of the weapon resins, Sunlight Blade is significantly stronger. Oh boy, we're going to put Undead Rapport in strats tier also. And then Undead Rapport can go in PvE to situationally useful. I guess this should also have a strats tier because you can probably do some crazy stuff with Undead Rapport, but it's really easy to get yourself killed in high New Game Plus cycles with Undead Rapport, and it's rather tricky to use. It's also pretty slow. And then Hidden Body is pretty much useless. Hidden Body is pretty much useless. Strong Magic Shield is strong, but not that strong. Same. Hidden Weapon. I'll put it in strats. it has kind of a use in PvP. I've seen people use it before. It's really goofy, but you'd be surprised how much other people not being able to see your weapon will, like, you know, kind of have effects on matches sometimes. And then it's pretty much completely useless in PvE, purely cosmetic. White Dragon Breath is too slow. Too slow for PvP, and too slow for PvE. It takes up a attunement slot that could be used by another spell that casts faster or does more damage. It's just really slow. Gravelord Sword Dance. Not excellent. Not excellent in either. Crystal Soul Spear. Situationally useful. I mean, honestly, it's generally useless. Like, it almost never hits anything, but if it does hit something, like, it has a tendency to kill it. So, you know, that sort of has its uses as well. Crystal Soul Spear is generally useful in PvE. Homing Soul Mass is kind of bad, mostly because Homing Crystal Soul Mass exists. Situationally useful in PvE. The situation where it's useful in PvE is you have Homing Soul Mass, but you don't have Crystal Homing Soul Mass yet, or Homing Crystal Soul Mass. That's the only situation where you'd ever use it, as far as I know. Sunlight Spear. Why does this have a New Game Plus tier? Hold on. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Sunlight Spear is similarly with the other lightning spears, just not excellent in PvP because it's just too slow. It's too slow. It's really, really slow. I'm not going to rearrange this as much as I want to. Generally useless. Fire Orb, Great Fireball. Oh, right. This goes in New Game Plus tier. In order to get the Sunlight Spear, you need to use the Soul of Gwyn at, like, the Sunlight Altar or whatever on New Game Plus, after having offered a bunch of Sunlight medals, and that, like, takes forever. So, boo, takes forever. Boo, boo band, boo. Great Fireball. I mean, I guess it's pretty strong. It's decently strong. Fire Surge is, I'm gonna put it in generally useful actually in PvP, because Fire Surge is no joke, dude. It's a little bit of chip damage, but like cumulatively over the course of a fight, it adds up to a more significant amount of damage than you would expect in most cases. And then Fire Surge is like kind of bad. You know what? I'm going to put it in generally useful in PvE, because Fire Surge, what it has above a lot of other spells is just like a ton of casts. Like, it doesn't do that much damage per cast, but for the cost of, like, you know, 5 or 6 casts of Fire Surge, you can do the damage of Combustion from a slightly greater distance. It's a decent amount of damage. Firestorm is pretty much worse than Fire Tempest or Chaos Storm in PvP, although you wouldn't want to use pretty much any of those in any sort of duel or fight club situation anyways, because you'll probably just get backstabbed. Firestorm in PvE is useful in the same situations as Chaos Storm and Fire Tempest, but it's a little bit easier to obtain, so you can use it a little bit more often. Pursuers is pretty okay in PvP. It's actually, I think, not as good as Homing Crystal Soul Mass in most cases. You can get someone to move around a lot if you cast Pursuers and then they start chasing someone, and that can be very useful if you have a spear or if you're trying to get a backstab, but it also has a little bit of a self-defeating aspect to it, where if you do manage to get a backstab because you casted Pursuers, it nets you a backstab, and that's pretty good, but also the backstab invulnerability will negate the damage from Pursuers, so you'll probably only hit them with like 1 or 2 Pursuers. It's weird. Long story short, it's just blah. Homing Crystal Soul Mass is better, I think. Although I think you can desync Pursuers as well. But anyways, PvE Pursuers is not as strong as Homing Crystal Soul Mass. Great Heal is pretty okay, I guess, kind of situational. Or you know what? It's generally useful in PvE. Having access to more heals in PvE is kind of nice if you're a newer player. Most most people wouldn't use attunement slots on that once they get sufficiently skilled, but of course you could. And then PvP, if you're doing duels or like if you're invading and you don't want to spend humanity, that's one use of it. Alternatively, if you're doing duels where healing of other forms is disallowed, but healing miracles are allowed, then Great Heal would be the option that you would choose there in most cases. Soul Spear is not. You're not gonna. You can sometimes hit people with it, but no, not really. Soul Spear in PvE is generally useful until you get your second cast or your second set of Crystal Soul Spears. You want a set of 4 Soul Spears and 4 Crystal Soul Spears for the later game bosses and also the DLC. You're going to need pretty much every cast you can get. But early on into the game and for a significant portion of the base game, 4 Crystal Soul Spears is like almost all of even the very tankiest boss's HP pool, assuming you land all of them. So yeah, pretty strong. Gravelord Greatsword Dance. No, I've seen people use it before. I guess the one sort of use that it has above the other storm spells is that it has like a pretty strong knockup, and sometimes you can't even really punish it. I'm gonna put it in situationally useful. I don't actually think it's strong, but like it's kind of it's kind of better than some. There have been some situations where I've been hit by Gravelord Greatsword Dance and not been able to return damage. So you know, it's situationally useful, I guess. Gravelord Greatsword Dance. It's generally useless in PvE. Bosses don't stagger in the same way in PvE, so kind of poopy. Flash Sweat. That is situationally useful. Almost no one will ever have it attuned, but actually, you know what? This is generally useless in PvP. Almost no one will ever have it attuned, and also you need to like cast it and then also get hit by Great Combustion or Black Flame or whatever. It's goofy. Flash Sweat in PvE is very useful in a few situations. Getting the Chaos Ember is one that comes to mind. Fighting the Centipede Demon is also a situation where Flash Sweat might be kind of useful. But for the most part, most players don't utilize it. It is one of the stronger body buffs in the game, though. It's just not something that most people use. Base Fireball, the situation that it's useful in PvE is you don't have any other spells yet, but in that situation it is very strong. And then of course in PvP it's like even harder to hit with than the other Fireball spells. So yeah. Vow of Silence is like Great Magic Barrier in that both of them are strong counters to mages, but Vow of Silence is different in that it is less useful, I think, generally speaking, and also I think Vow of Silence might also silence the caster, but I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. And then Vow of Silence is like pretty much completely useless in PvE. It isn't quite completely useless because you can like use Vow of Silence against certain spellcaster enemies, but like those are rare and you have to have like prepared for that event in advance, and then it's a lot of setup. It's less useful than both Magic Barrier and Great Magic Barrier in almost every situation. Fall Control is pretty much useless in PvP. A lot of the falls that you run into in PvP are lethal regardless because they hit a kill plane and don't do actual fall damage. And then there are a lot of goofy things that you can do with fall control in PvE, but for the most part, once again, it just isn't really worth the setup for all that. Although I kind of like to use fall control. I this is man, I could complain about this for hours, but anyways, I won't. Iron Flesh. It's pretty useless. If you use Iron Flesh in PvP, you're not going to be able to catch up with anyone. You're not going to be able to dodge, and lots of other things still do full damage to you. So yeah, there are some old videos of people using Iron Flesh on PvP builds, but for the most part, it's kind of a meme and just for fun, and not actually exceptionally strong. And then it's generally useless in PvE as well for similar reasons. It just makes you really, really slow. You know what? Situationally useful. There are a lot of situations in PvE where you can just slap on stone armor and, not die. And in those situations, like, you might as well be overburdened and just put Iron Flesh on also. So, you know what? Be super invincible for all I care. Soul Arrow is, I mean, honestly, I should put this in completely useless in PvP. I'm not going to because it's technically not. Maybe I should have done these tier lists slightly differently, but whatever. And then Soul Arrow is fantastic in PvE, even after you get stronger variants of Soul Arrow. And actually, I'm moving Heavy Soul Arrow down, and I'm going to put Great Heavy Soul Arrow into generally useful alongside Great Soul Arrow and Soul Arrow, because Soul Arrow has like 30 casts, like a ton of casts. Great Soul Arrow has significantly fewer than that, and Great Heavy Soul Arrow has fewer still. But Great Heavy Soul Arrow, the slow cast time is rewarded with a lot of poise damage and a lot of damage. So it's more useful for like early game bosses, and then Soul Arrow is strong against standard enemies throughout like the majority of the game. Most people past the midpoint of the game don't utilize sorceries to fight enemies anymore, or at least not like standard like base enemies. They'll just use their sorceries for mini bosses and bosses. But if you do actually do a sorcerer playthrough where you actually use sorceries as your primary form of damage, then Soul Arrow is actually excellent, because 30 casts is a lot. Even for the early game, where there's lots of enemies with low HP, it has enough casts. Force is situationally useful in PvP, but the only situation that it's really useful in PvP is like knocking people off cliffs and stuff, and that's kind of goofy. And then in PvE, it's like almost completely useless, but I'm going to put it in generally useless. There are a few situations where it's actually useful. You can do some really weird stuff with it in PvE, like deflecting the Firebomb Giant's firebombs. You can deflect the Anor Londo Archer's arrows with it, I think, along with like probably the little firebombs from the little firebomb throwers in like the Berg and stuff. But 21 casts is more than you usually need. I mean, I don't know. It's a sometimes food. It's a sometimes food for sure. Situationally useful. Great Chaos Fireball? Nah, generally useless. It's the Fireball spell. You know what? Man, the Fireballs just aren't that bad though. I'll put them in situationally useful, I guess. I haven't thought this tier list out very much, but and the community tier list for the spells is actually a lot better than the one for the weapons, so that's pretty nice, I guess. Soothing Sunlight, I feel like there's a reason that this is not very strong. I think it only has one cast. And one cast is not enough in both PvP and PvE. Also, I think it's an AoE heal. so I guess I'll put it in situationally useful for PvE. Like if you have a group of people, you can kind of heal all of them a little bit, but for the most part, that's just not really that useful. So yeah. Great Heavy Soul Arrow is pretty much useless in PvP. Great Combustion is pretty good, but I'm gonna put it in generally useful, and then I'm gonna put it in generally useful for PvE as well. In PvP, Black Flame and Great Combustion are both similarly useful because having Black Flame on your build allows you to stagger anyone who doesn't have 61 poise or more. And if they do have more than 61 poise, then in most cases, Great Combustion will do more damage. It also does Black Flame also does more shield damage than, or like stamina damage, stability damage than Great Combustion. But most builds that run one of them will run both. And then in PvE, Great Combustion is better than Black Flame because almost every enemy in the entire game has more resistance between the split damage type of Black Flame's physical and fire than pure fire damage resistance in the case of Great Combustion. Seek Guidance is useless in PvP. Seek Guidance is honestly pretty much completely useless in PvE also, because it, like, a lot of the messages lie to you, so, or they're just useless information. A significant amount of useless information and complete lies. If you follow every message that you read in Dark Souls, you will walk off of many cliffs. And find yourself returning to the bonfire. Combustion is kind of useless in PvP. It has more casts than Great Combustion, but it has a smaller area of effect and lower damage, so most people don't use it. Did I say PvE or PvP? I don't know. But anyways, Combustion in PvE is, I'm going to put it in generally useful. For the entirety of the game prior to getting Great Combustion, Combustion is a significant source of damage for anyone with a Pyromancy flame that they've invested into. And having 16 casts is enough for it to continue to be useful even later on into the game, where things sometimes take more than one combustion to kill. If it ever takes you more than 3 combustions, then you should probably just use Great Combustion and do a little bit of extra damage some other way. But for the most part, Combustion is like pretty strong. I think that's actually all the spells. I don't think they missed any on this list, so there aren't really any extras to talk about. But yeah, I made this video partially because I wanted to. I actually... A significant portion of the views on all of my Dark Souls tier list videos are actually from me. I spent a lot of time listening to them, and every time I get to one of the parts that I was wrong about, I like skip over it. But yeah, so maybe I'll enjoy listening to this video or whatever, and I hope you do as well. Anyways, I'll see you guys some other time.